Welcome to Capacity Building Stories Climate Action 101, a podcast brought to you by the Paris Commune and Capacity Buildings Network in partnership with the United Nations University. I'm Eva Costas, your host, and in this series, we're breaking down the essentials of climate action, 101 style. Join us as we explore key concepts related to climate change while connecting the dots between capacity building, research, policy, and practical solutions. Let's dive in. Welcome to Coalition Building 101. Today, we're diving into what coalition building is, why it matters, and the capacity building tools and methodologies that are transforming cities and communities in the fight against climate change. Joining us today, we have two wonderful experts on the topic, Andrea Ramirez and Flavia Guerra. Could you please introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Hi, Eva. I'm Andrea. I'm a senior researcher at UNU EHS. My role here is to facilitate capacity development, which is this process in which we develop our competences and skills to be better tackling a global concern, which is climate change.
Hey everyone, I'm Flavia Guerra, and I'm also a senior researcher at the UN University Institute for Environment and Human Security. I mostly research on projects about participatory governance and mindset shifts, and really trying to assess what people think about climate change and what changes might be needed there.
Welcome both. Now, to set the stage, Andrea, could you start by explaining what exactly is coalition building?
Of course, coalition building is this process of bringing together diverse groups. So when we think about tools and methodologies for this purpose, we could go instinctively to think, okay, how can I gather with my neighbors, or how can I gather with my policymakers in my city? But also it's about how can we integrate persons that we are not used to talk to in these conversations. So it's about engaging with private sector, engaging with academics and researchers, and of course is to create this space in which we can address together common concerns, but first identifying also what these problems means to us in terms of climate action or in terms of climate change. Some of these problems could be related to how we live in cities or how is our country addressing these concerns in their agenda. And the coalition is this process of getting together, exchange this conversation, but also bringing together solutions.
And now, why do you think coalition building is such an important skill when it comes to fostering ambitious climate action?
Climate action could be seen as a burden and could be seen as a heavy and long process in which we feel hopeless. But coalition building as a skill and as a methodology is this process in which we can reframe how communities envision their future and to lead to these practical and scalable solutions through experimentation and learning. So that's the key process that we want to develop in these trainings.
Wonderful. Now, I understand, Flavia, that both of you have been involved in testing this methodology on cities, especially through the Transformative Urban Coalitions project. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Sure. So the Transformative Urban Coalitions project, we started in 2021. We work mostly in Latin American cities where we helped establish what we call urban labs. So these participatory governance approaches to different issues that cities are facing, including climate change. So it's all about bringing people together. It's about forming these coalitions, from starting with academia, communities, policymakers, the private sector. Everyone gets a seat at the table, and really they talk. Like Andrea said, they might have not talked before, but in these urban labs, it's all about coming together, sharing what their concerns are about their cities, what type of actions they would like to see, and then really trying to experiment with those solutions and see if it's actually viable and it can be scaled. So we worked on this for 3 years now. Part of my work is mostly around the mapping people's mindsets, how they felt, how they thought about climate change when we started the process, and how that has evolved now. And recently, we've tried to put together all the learnings from these 3 years into a 2-hour training session, which has been challenging, but we've been testing it in different sessions at different events. And so it's been interesting to see how people really developed these skills on collaboration, problem solving, coming together, consensus building, and try to envision a different future where they work together to fight different problems that cities are facing, not just climate change, but things like the lack of infrastructure, the lack of basic services, waste management. So we've been working on this very different range of different issues in the cities.
Thank you. So we're just talking about the positives that these methodologies bring to cities, but then also you just mentioned towards the end the different problems the cities are facing. So could you actually tell the listeners a little bit more about how climate change is actually impacting cities and urban areas today?
Sure. I think one thing that we need to keep in mind, just to put it all into perspective, is that over 56% of the global population is living in cities. We're talking about 4.4 billion inhabitants in cities. And this trend is only expected to grow, right? So we expect that by 2050, 7 in every 10 people will be living in cities. So it's unsurprising that cities are responsible for over 70% of global emissions. So motorized transport, buildings, all those things that can be found mostly in cities are really contributing to climate change. And this is not a distant concern. It's here. Like, it's already affecting and shaping our cities everywhere. We have rising temperatures, intensifying heat waves, floods are more frequent, air quality is worsening very rapidly all over the globe. And this definitely calls for urgent action, not just because of the climate impacts, but also the interconnections between the impacts of all of these climate-induced events with other stresses. So we're talking social stresses, environmental, economic. So more people in cities means more demand for affordable housing and infrastructure and transport systems, public transport systems, basic services, but also jobs. So the climate crisis will pretty much be fought, won, or lost in cities.
And I'm wondering, Flavia, within these cities, which would you say are the urban communities that are facing the most significant effects of climate change and these stressors that you just mentioned?
So climate change disproportionately affects populations or communities that are already vulnerable. So talking about low-income groups, women, children, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. So we know that they bear the brunt of most of the impacts of these extreme weather events. And also most of the loss of lives and livelihoods affects them. So we have 1 billion people that live in informal settlements in cities. So we know that climate change is exacerbating already existing social and economic inequalities. And these groups are then more exposed to these vulnerabilities.
And for those living in these vulnerable areas, what can urban dwellers do directly to tackle climate change in their own cities?
I can go there to answer this one, Eva. And it's all what Flavia has been saying is the living experiences of these people, but also when you go to these territories, you will find a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity, a lot of diversity, and people willing to transform their cities and transform their countries and do many meaningful things for climate action. For us, the conversation goes through how can we structure better these efforts and not think of these actions as individual efforts, but as collective efforts. And that's why coalition building comes into place. And that's why, for us, these tools and methodologies that we have developed bring in place these advantages and these opportunities to liaise better with the communities, to create higher awareness, not only on the problems, but on the potential solutions that could link these problems in cities, but also these development opportunities and these poverty alleviation, and of course these solutions that are required in terms of technical innovation, but also in terms of inspiration stories on the ground that could be replicated elsewhere.
Thank you so much for that, Andrea. And you were just talking about, again, how coalitions can be so incredibly powerful, but I would assume that they're not without challenges, right? So could you tell us a little bit more about what you reckon the main barriers to coalition building are that could essentially hinder this potential for transformation that coalitions have?
So like I mentioned, in our project, Transformative Urban Coalitions, we've been working since 2021. And most of that time, so we're still working on that project, has been spent on coalition building. So there's different phases to transformation. Starts with coalition building, can go then to visioning, co-design of solutions, and then to experimentation, monitoring, evaluation, and scaling. So the first step, coalition building, it's so complex and it's so challenging. I think, well, I did mention before, we're working mostly in Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina. Mostly governance or approaches to city planning, urban planning are usually very top-down, traditionally. And there's exceptions, of course. But so that means that if urban planning processes are very government-led, whenever there's political shifts, they can easily derail any progress that has been made. So our transformative coalitions, the idea behind them is that they're decentralized and they're very collaborative. So they mix top-down and bottom-up governance. That this comes back to what I said in the beginning. So we bring all of these different stakeholders together to make the decisions. And it comes with a lot of challenges, hence the time that it takes and the resources it takes to power this process through. So from conflicting agendas, lack of trust there can be between policymakers, NGOs, communities, and this makes it very difficult to build consensus. But when it happens, it's really beautiful, and it has happened in the 5 cities that we're working on in Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico. After 3 years, they've managed to reach agreements and do projects together and find common ground. And I think one of the lessons we've learned is the importance of having the coalitions be a neutral space where every voice is heard and valued. And then the other thing, it's about maintaining momentum. So they need to do things together, because talking is great, but if they don't see that there are some quick wins and it's making a difference, that they're working together rather than working by themselves, it's just, it can break trust, it can provoke disengagement. So really keeping them interested and owning the projects, and seeing the successes, it's amazing. And so, yeah, we need a mindset shift here. So people need to not only recognize the importance of working together, but also the connections between different issues in the city. So climate change and urban development and social justice and inequalities. How can they address this in more systematic ways?
So now looking at addressing some of these challenges that you mentioned, Flavia, I'm wondering, how can research and capacity building support coalition building?
Okay, well, as Flavia explained, this is a long process that requires trust and requires commitment. And these are efforts that only go through exchange. So the methodology for us of creating coalition building for addressing these challenges is precisely to integrate the diverse voices on this conversation, and to embrace this diversity in terms of recognition, because we all have a position in these conversations. We all understand climate with a different mindset because of our background, because of our values, because of our lived experiences. Therefore, the exchange is what makes this conversation very interesting. And the methodologies that we have developed have different components. It's like a framework in which we go from one dimension to another. But what we want to create is first awareness that there are inspiring stories happening on the ground. There are a lot of efforts already ongoing. Second, we have to acknowledge that we are advancing, and that means being accountable of our efforts, being accountable of our public policies and what we are doing to address this global concern. And the third one is that we all have transformative capacities, and that could be framed as simple as believing in our superpowers and acknowledging that we are not powerless in this conversation to climate. And together, this is a coalition. When we acknowledge that we are different, and that's why we could innovate together and we can develop together creative projects and connect what we do in our professional roles or with what we do as neighbors or what we do as mothers or caretakers. What we have developed in terms of research and capacity is precisely this exchange and this potential to integrate research, capacity development, and policy recommendations. And this is our key point in this training. Together, we are more powerful. Together, we can address these challenges. but we can do it in a better way if we follow a specific methodology, and that's coalition building.
Thanks so much, Andrea. Indeed, coalition building kind of becoming this bridge of the research and the policy gap. But I'm wondering, though, for those that are more interested in practically implementing these methodologies, do you have any methodologies that you find particularly effective or tools to actually support this coalition building process?
Yes, absolutely. It's a series of tools and methodologies. For example, we have this self-assessment of mindsets to understand our positioning and then getting everybody to the ground. We have developed this coalition building also in this project that Flavia was mentioning as a long-term process of co-creation, which could be understood also as an urban lab. And we have this interest of understanding, of course, what tools could work better at the different stages if we are envisioning a solution together, if we are putting it in practice, like a demonstration activity. So altogether, it's a big framework of actions. But specifically, what we want to deliver here is that through this expertise, we are capturing and encapsulating all this long process for a 2-hour session in which we can go from the specific needs and expectations of a community to envision a collective action together. And in our methodology, what we deliver is basically a 3-step process in which we recognize what we bring to the table, what are our common concerns, and how can we liaise better to make this happen faster and better and be more effective in this climate conversation.
If I can take just a couple of seconds, it's a bit of a self-promo part of the podcast. So Andrea mentioned some of the tools like the self-assessment of mindsets tool, the big toolbox we're developing for urban transformation, the training. So if you want to see all of this, we plan on publishing them soon on the site urbancoalitions.org.
Thank you both. And we'll definitely make sure that we link them on the description box so listeners can also access the resources. So again, I would assume as well that with your work, you actually have case studies of cities that have actually been able to effectively implement these methodologies and that are acting as champions of climate action through this coalition building. Could you share with us any examples?
There are many. For me, it's very inspiring what is happening in Mexico and the female leadership taking on the ground who have demonstrated that women can lead demonstrative activities because of their practical approach to climate action and how they are very concerned into converting abandoned spaces into urban gardens, for example. And that for us in the science could be framed as nature-based solutions. But in the reality on the ground is people doing their gardening as they have always been doing it, but thinking of this as a collective effort for their neighborhoods. And that's amazing. In this conversation, of course, we can exchange more. Please, Flavia, you have to point out that what is happening in Buenos Aires here.
Yeah, of course. So I've been mostly working with the community, the coalition in Buenos Aires in Argentina. So around 3 years ago when we started working there, we're working in Barrio 20. It's an informal settlement that is undergoing upgrading since 2016. And when we started, there were already the beginnings of a coalition. So the community and the government were very much collaborating on the decisions on how to go about the upgrading process and what to do, which houses would live where. So when we came in, there was this big focus on infrastructure upgrades and providing or securing adequate housing for everyone. That was understandably the priority. And it was difficult to talk about climate change because it wasn't seen as urgent. But over time, they started realizing that there were benefits. Talking about environmental climate issues, the lack of green spaces in the settlement that came with a lot of other problems. So the exacerbated impact of heat waves and floods, because all of the soil, there was no soil, it was all cement. So and over time, it wasn't research, it wasn't capacity development only that triggered this shift in thinking, in mindsets. It was that actually more people started joining the coalition. So other areas of government that work with climate change, that work with environmental issues, that work with territorial data, with citizen science. There were other NGOs, even the private sector, researchers that joined the coalition and the debate. So all of these knowledge sharing of skills, it made the interest of the community spike in nature-based solutions, for example. But it also allows them to start developing their own projects and greening their neighborhood, adding plants, adding other types of nature-based solutions together. And this created also new capacities, opportunities for jobs, which was and is amazing. And it has been internationally recognized. So just this year, a couple of months ago, they started winning prizes and recognition for their efforts. And this is truly a transformative urban coalition, not just due to the physical changes that we can see in the informal settlement, but also these social changes. They're very much community led, and we hope that they will stay. And even if government agendas and priorities do change.
Now, before we wrap up the episode, I do have a bit of a big question for both of you, because I'm wondering, especially after both of you talking about these incredibly inspiring and transformative initiatives, how can we maximize and scale up the impact of these initiatives beyond the cities and these local contexts?
Thanks, Eva. This is precisely the root of this question for us as researchers. And what we have understood in this process, especially in Brazil, is that only by doing these examples, being visible and disseminating these lessons learned on the ground, public policy can uptake this at national level. And this is what is happening now with the program called Periferia Viva for Brazil, which is a national agenda in which they are trying to integrate different sectors to address the concerns of the population living in the peripheries, but also the understanding that the climate agenda is linked to other concerns. It's linked to health, it's linked to housing conditions, it's linked to the energy transition, and it's not only cost effective for public action to invest in these processes together, but it's also for us very motivating to see how national public policy and public policy that encapsulates these learnings can replicate these. For example, in the case of Brazil, the learnings will be replicated in more than 50 cities, and this will bring a transformation agenda at the national level. And this is something very helpful for us in this context. These are lessons that could be replicated elsewhere. We have these different countries with many needs, and we all share this concern about how can we be more efficient with the budget that we have? How can we liaise better to make our efforts more impactful for our communities? So the integration of evidence-based into policy making is key. And that's why at our institute, at UNU, we tried our best to link the climate and the risk agenda into these national agendas and into the conversation for the future, for a better future for all of us.
That was a great ending.
Indeed, and I think, in my opinion, on that powerful note, this concludes today's episode. Essentially, a huge thank you to the two of you, Andrea and Flavia, again, for all your insights into coalition building as a transformative capacity building methodology for climate action in urban communities, but also beyond, as you were just saying, Andrea. We hope this podcast has provided, again, momentum for coalition building that you guys have mentioned through the episode. Again, all the tools, methodologies, resources, case studies mentioned will be posted in the description box. And if you enjoyed the discussion, be sure to check out other episodes under the CB Stories Climate Action 101 series. So stay tuned for that. And thanks again for listening.